that the switch to natural language processing is a necessity to actually allow us to juggle more things all at once and dedicate resources or pass on tasks to the AI. What other kind of impediments are you seeing besides natural language as a way to communicate with an AI to actually enable users to ask for their tasks to be carried out by the systems?
Well, I think one of the things in product development methodology, when you release a new product or service, one of the core best practices is to make sure that you're trying to minimize behavioral change. And what we're talking about is the creation of an ecosystem. We're in the midst of an ecosystem. Interoperability, security standards, and hence the consortiums and alliances. There are significant challenges, and what's happening is that the advancement of hardware, software, and edge computing is going faster than our ability to integrate the ecosystem and to change the user behavior. So fundamentally, the question that you're posing has to do with, are we ready to embrace this, and are we ready to use speech as an example to interface with smart things? Yes and no. And it's going to be based on segmentation and who's ready. Let's take the example. Comcast and others are very interested in the home for good reason. I had a chance to speak and converse with some colleagues from iControl Networks and People Power that are involved in home surveillance. One of the key theses that they had when they went into this venture was that people were concerned about utility and savings in terms of electricity, water, heater, etc. Well, what it turned out was actually they could care less about utilities. What they care about is a peace of mind. Hence, what Comcast and others are selling isn't things. They're selling a peace of mind, an abstract concept. So that if your child is at home, they're about 12, 13, they can afford to stay home, but you need to know that they're safe. Or you have a pet, or more importantly, one of the biggest segment that's coming up around healthcare is elderly people living at home independently. If you ask an elderly person, can you set up this home controller hub and device and make sure it's Zigbee compatible, and good luck with that, a 70-year-old is going to say, what is this thing? A 70 or 80-year-old is more likely and more inclined if you bring a smart medication dispensing unit that can just do things by itself without me even having to configure what the IP address is. And you just speak to it. Call my son. Call my grandkids. Call my doctor. Stop giving me this prescription.
Makes sense. Thank you. Another observation that I made while you were giving your talk is that you basically argued that computation must happen locally, that even though we're moving away, in a sense, from a cloud-based operation, and it reminded me that people in data analytics are talking about descriptive model, predictive model, then prescriptive model to actually make decisions based on what you predict, which is rooted in what you described. All of this needs to move locally to actually make it sustainable and more secure and more adaptable. How is this going to happen, and what kind of challenge is that going to create for industry at large?
All right, so let me just clarify first, is that not all things are ideal for edge computing or cloud computing. So what we're talking about is a spectrum. So it's not mutually exclusive, but rather, depending on the job or the task that you're trying to process, you may require to do one or other and in between. Let me give you an example. When I went to Siemens' lead building called the Crystal in London, which is one of the, I think it's the highest rated lead building in the world that has the lowest carbon footprint. A demonstration that I saw was this computer vision device that gets placed into a bathroom. What it's doing is it's actually taking a photo of you in the bathroom, which is very creepy. But because of GDPR and other privacy regulation in Europe, you can't do that. So how do they handle this? Well, again, I'm not necessarily saying it's a good approach or a bad approach, but what the technology is doing is taking pictures of how many people. And the premise is more people, dirty it is, and therefore after so many count, you should send in a maintenance crew to clean the bathroom. Well, the way they handle this is some of it is handled locally on the edge, meaning the photo processing piece. And what they actually send to the cloud is a count. They don't send the image. They just send 1, 5, 2. So fortunately, that's good news for us, because frankly, I don't like to be taking pictures in the bathroom.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that makes sense. Let's open it up to questions from the audience. So please.
Hello? Hello? Is it working?
Yeah, go ahead.
We good? Oh, okay. So with the birth of like IoT devices and like we start like coming up with this new technology, the question comes up, like how do we address maintaining that code from a security perspective? So for example, recent DDoS attacks on, for example, Brian Krebs' website, that was a problem and it came from IoT devices getting hacked. Is there something that you can do from your end to ensure that these developers are implementing the best security practices for their devices?
So great question, and what you're really trying to address at the heart of it has to do with standards. So you have everybody from power device creators to home automation devices and so forth. It's very difficult to have an enforcement and a compliance. So first, it needs standards, and that's where the consortiums and alliances are working. Secondly, it needs enforcement. Then you need to make sure that there is actual regulatory bodies to help facilitate this. I am the believer in laissez-faire capitalistic society, but there are cases where we need some regulatory policies in place to help secure this thing. I have a friend who runs a company called Augmate out of New York. And what Augmate does is it helps companies, enterprises, to securely bring in wearables and IoT devices into their environment, including the ability to actually shut things down and handle updates and upgrades via the air. Now, yours is a multi-pronged question that's difficult to address, and we're not going to be able to address it easily. But some of the things that I would recommend for companies like Comcast is, where are the things happening? So for example, recently, because we have to do a lot of product reviews for IoT things, I have a door or window sensor that can tell me if it's closed or open. It only works on Zigbee, unfortunately. So I need to have a controller that can handle the Zigbee protocol. But then I have another device that works on a different protocol or standard. So then I need another controller. So what's going to happen is we need to have, think about at the router, at the gateway, right? Where it's a sensor hub that allows for one, handle different standards and protocols so that you're not having to deal with multiple. And that's where you have the processing power and the memory and the storage where you can actually install security capabilities. We deal with a lot of startups, and some of the things that we're seeing are everything from crypto chips to those that work on policy. So the OEMs will actually provide specific policies, and the authentication process will say, okay, it will actually go through the policies and check, 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 and only then will actually allow for that connection to happen. And we're seeing firmware. We're seeing software within the chip as well as in the hardware and within the router and the gateway and the modems and so forth. We're starting to handle this because at the edge level, it's difficult to have a standard consistently. Thank you for that question.
Thank you. One last question, and maybe we'll break.
Can anyone hear me? Oh, there we go. So my question is related to the change from the centralized networking model to a distributed and mesh network. A lot of the security tools we rely on today, like intrusion detection systems and kind of like network level security, seem to rely on kind of having a centralized point of access. How do you think a company should ensure their Internet of Things devices know that their neighbors that are communicating with them are devices that can be trusted?
So I'm going to turn that question back to you and say, what are you going to do to create a startup to address that problem? Because there is a lady sitting at this table who is ready to potentially invest in that. But honestly, PTC, IBM, Cisco, GE, all of them are asking the same questions. And matter of fact, we got a call from DARPA 2 weeks ago and saying, Scott, we know you're an expert in this space. We think that the future is on the sophistication of IoT sensors, edge analytics, and AI. Can you help us? So solve your own problem and come and see me in a few years.
Thanks.
Thank you.
With this, please join me in thanking Scott for an outstanding talk. And we are going now to actually let us have